Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Emily Stone, and I'm the Naturalist and Education Director here at the Cable Natural History Museum. And one of the best parts of my job is hanging out with experts in different topics and the scientists and everything. So I was really thrilled when Michael called and needed volunteers for his Saw-whet owl project, because they're adorable. Flying kittens, I learned. There's a description of them today. And so I'm thrilled that Michael was able to stay a little bit longer on his research visit up here to share information about the owls and his project. And then we do have the volunteer sign-up sheet at the back of the room. So if you already contacted me about volunteering, you can check your information on that and make sure it's correct. And if you haven't sent me that you want to volunteer and you do, you can add your information to that sheet. And he may talk a little bit more about what that volunteering will entail. And we have people on Zoom, and then we're recording this as well. So I'll send everybody an email with a link. It'll be posted on our YouTube page if you don't get the link for some reason, and you can watch it again later if you want, or share it with somebody else. Are there any questions before we begin? Okay, thanks so much, Michael.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming today. This has been kind of a wild journey getting here to this point. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation, about how we ended up here in Bayfield County from central Illinois, the corn and soybean deserts of the country. But I'm here to talk about saw-whet owls in Bayfield County, and we'll go ahead and begin. So just a little bit about me. I work as an avian lab manager and field coordinator at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, in central Illinois, that is. And what that means is I help run a bird banding station near campus in the spring and the fall. I actually called in, played hooky on Tuesday. We were up here in Bayfield County instead of being down there running the station, but we've got other people that I work with down there who covered for me. I maintain a network of soon to be almost 41 Motus stations in Illinois, 3 in Wisconsin, 11 in Mexico. Just a quick show of hands, how many people have heard of Motus before? Okay, wow, that's great. All right, for those of you that don't know, that's all right. I'll do a quick primer on that so you know. We'll get you in the loop. I conduct surveys of breeding birds in Illinois. I support whippoorwill and black-crowned night heron projects in Illinois and Florida. Conduct saw-whet owl research and associated public outreach nights in Illinois and, of course, in Wisconsin here. And then coordinate deployment of Motus tags on wood thrushes in Illinois. This was part of a larger collaboration where they actually did this in Wisconsin as well. And we've been in touch with the points of contact here as well, which has been fun. So this is... I'm going to do a quick disclaimer that you'll see a lot from Illinois, and then I'll be comparing it to Wisconsin just because a lot of it gives you some background and context, and then I'll talk about how it's being applied here in Wisconsin. So here's kind of what Motus looks like in Illinois, or in and around Illinois. And so what these Motus stations are these antennas that are put somewhere. In this case, I was kind of strategic in that I've got a line going across southern Illinois, central Illinois, and then northern Illinois along the Wisconsin border, so that as birds migrate past, if they have a transmitter on them, then they'll be detected by one of those stations, hopefully, as they pass by under the cover of nightfall. So it's a neat thing. It's a time-intensive thing, but technology has really allowed us to understand what birds are doing when they're migrating, especially these smaller birds, because a lot of people would say, well, we have technology, why not just throw a GPS transmitter on them? And for some birds, you can. For something like the size of a goose, or many of you might be familiar with some of the studies people do with larger mammals where they'll put a GPS collar or something on them. But the reality is these flying kittens and smaller birds cannot carry a heavy GPS transmitter, especially when you think about how far they're moving. In Wisconsin, specifically in the Bayfield County area, we have 3 that we just installed in March/June. So this is our 3rd visit up here this year. You'll see one kind of north of Iron River, one, and then 2 kind of just north of Barnes in the kind of Bayfield County forest, or Bayfield County, I think it's like their forest, the state, the county land. But I'm here to talk to you about these guys and gals. So without further ado, there are many species of Wisconsin owls that you might be familiar with. Starting over in the corner, Kurt Reed knows my nemesis owl, barn owl. They're pretty common, especially in the central and southern part of Wisconsin. They're a little bit less common as you get further north. Down here we've got short-eared owls, which are kind of more of a prairie diurnal, well, I should say evening morning bird. Barn owls, which tend to inhabit human structures. We've got screech owl, my personal favorite. Although the screech owls are a little bit harder to find up this far north. They kind of start to peter out. Long-eared owls, this is kind of a resident of the boreal forest, like saw-whet owls, and they do migrate down here in the winter, which is pretty neat, but they are pretty secretive. Great horned owl are pretty common. They're the largest owl for the most part in Wisconsin, with the exception of snowy owls, which are even larger, and they tend to inhabit the tundra, but they'll come down in eruptions. Some years you'll see large numbers of snowy owls that they come down, and that was usually a good year where they had lots of lemmings and they could feed lots of babies, and they come down in mass, a giant army of snowy owls. But we're talking about this little guy right here today. So what makes the saw-whet owl so special? It's a very small owl, about the size of your fist. And you can see kind of in the lineup over here, all the different owls across North America. And the saw-whet owl this is actually to scale. So actually pretty tiny, right? Especially when you consider the snowy owl there. And it is an owl kind of world out there. So saw-whet owls definitely kind of got to watch for larger predators that might get them in the night. So the mass of the owl is only about 90 grams. So really not much, especially when you consider their prey, which is pretty exclusively mice and voles. I mean, a white-footed mouse can weigh in at 30 grams, which is a third of the weight of the bird. And so some people often wonder, well, how do they manage that? And it's actually pretty cute. What they'll do is they'll catch their prey, they'll find a perch, and they'll start nibbling on it, and they can't eat the whole thing in one sitting, right? So they'll oftentimes eat half of it, and then they just kind of leave it there, kind of like, and it's cold enough here in the winter, right? It's like a refrigerator, it won't spoil. They leave it on a branch, and they'll eat the rest later. We'll talk a lot about an owl called Archie. He's kind of our celebrity, our local celebrity here. But we were, Addie and I, and I'll talk about Addie and Kurt quite a bit. I'll probably introduce you here in a bit. But Archie, Addie and I were looking for Archie, and we had our hand tracker out, and we knew we were getting close, and I'm not as observant as Addie is. And she goes, well, what's this right here on the tree? And here it was a red-backed vole that was kind of half eaten. I said, I think we're getting close. So, saw-whet owls are pretty cool too, in that they're cavity nesters, and that's a really important thing that I'll keep coming back to in terms of their life history here, because they're looking for these older trees that have holes that might have been excavated by a pileated woodpecker or some other creature, and that's what they'll use to lay their eggs and raise their young in. So unlike a lot of owls in North America, saw-whet owls are actually migratory. So they breed in the northern boreal forests, including the north woods of Bayfield County. And that's part of the reason why we're here. So the northern Great Lakes, Canada, and then they'll winter to points as far south as Alabama. And that's, again, what brought me here, because I was always seeing the saw-whet owls in Illinois in the winter and sitting there thinking, okay, where are these coming from and what are they doing? And what's accounting for the different things that I'm seeing here in Illinois in the winter? Because down in Illinois, what I'll notice when we open nets in about 2 weeks to start our banding season, I'll notice that 80 to 90% of the birds that I capture are actually female. And we don't think there's that many more females than males, but we think there must be something going on in that maybe the males just aren't moving from their breeding territories. And we'll hit on that more later. The other thing that I noticed downstream from here is that some years I get a ton of owls, and then other years I hardly get any. In fact, historically, there seems to be kind of a cycle to that every 4 years we get an owl eruption, so to speak. And we're very busy. And then there's other nights where we're just sitting there wondering what we're doing with ourselves and why we're out here in the cold and the dark. We're not catching any owls. How many people prior to this talk have heard of a saw-whet owl before? Oh yeah, good. See, I can tell I'm in the breeding territory. Down in central Illinois, they're like, saw-whet? What? What is that? And a lot of people, for that reason, they're like, well, what are you talking about? Well, one of the main reasons that people outside of here don't know about saw-whet owls is that they really only vocalize during the breeding season. So you'll hear them up here, but when they come down, and I could have 20 owls on the landscape in Illinois and we would never know it because they don't vocalize down there. They're, they hide. It's a small owl. They're in this dense understory, bushes, brush that nobody in their right mind at least wants to walk through and try to find them. And it's boggy stuff, so you're walking through wet and getting muddy and cold. But what really brought this to light a few years ago was, if you've ever heard of the Rockefeller Christmas tree in New York, they always go upstate New York and they cut down this big magnificent tree and then they drive it all the way down to the city. So they did that the one year and they go to unpack the tree and they see two little beady eyes looking out at them. And here this poor little owl had actually taken the entire trip because they cut the tree down, it didn't move, and it moved with the tree all the way down to downtown. So of course they put it in a rehab facility. They didn't want to subject it to the stresses of can you imagine, living in a peaceful environment like this and then all of a sudden being dropped off in New York City? Merry Christmas, right? So yeah, they called him Rocky and it kind of became a mascot. That's where you see the mascot figure skating and all that kind of thing. And it really brought saw-whet owls into the limelight. So this just kind of shows it's obvious where saw-whet owls exist, right? I mean, if you went out looking for one, everybody can see where the saw-whet owl is in there, right? It's obvious. I'll give you just a minute. Yeah, so when we put transmitters on these birds, and then we'll go out and we'll track them periodically to do behavioral studies and that sort of thing. And there's times when I'm out there with an antenna, and I know the signal's strong, and I'm looking at the number just going up and up, and I'm like, I think I'm touching the owl, but I don't see it, right? And it's actually right there. I think I see, Kurt. We need to hire this guy here. He saw it. Yeah. So
I was 2 feet away from him.
yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it is really rewarding when you do see one up close because it's quite a challenge. In Illinois, in the winter, because obviously our landscape is very different down there, and we have really great things like invasive bush honeysuckle and invasive autumn olive, and these guys love that stuff. I think in the past they would kind of go into these areas that were just really dense brush with like wild grapevines and that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, so what we know about saw-whet owls. Many people ban saw-whets, but they have no other information beyond if the bird's recaptured. So I think there's like 200, 150, 200 banding stations. But they don't know where the birds go unless somebody else would recapture. And there's not that many bird banding stations. That being said, if I were to ban a saw-whet owl, because there are that many banding stations, there's actually a 35% chance that somebody else will recapture the owl that I banded, which is really cool. It's almost like sending a postcard to someone else when you're able to band one and then they recapture the owl, and then they know more about where the owl went and how old it was and that sort of thing. But I guess that begs the question of how do you actually know, how do you actually capture the owl, right? So we use a conspecific toot call. On the breeding territories, the owls make this toot toot toot, and it sounds something like this. And Addie and I hear this in our sleep now because we played these call boxes all night long. And but they do make other calls. All right, there's a little. So they make this whine. It's wild. I mean, imagine going into a quiet forest and then hearing that. And then they also, when we do our nets, and they get agitated. They'll oftentimes bark at the collar like this. Isn't that cute? I mean, so in any case, so we know that about, the calls they make. Let's see if I can go on here. So what we do know exists because of a collaboration called Project Owlnet. So I was talking about those 100, 150, 200 banding stations across the United States and Canada. Of course, we have 2 banding stations that I run in Central Illinois. Kurt Reed, who I'll allude to a lot, sitting up here in the front in the blue T-shirt, actually runs a Project Owlnet station just over by Clam Lake. So that's your closest local Project Owlnet station. And they establish a protocol for capturing and banding saw-whet owls. So everybody's doing things pretty similar, and that we can collect data from all of those stations and actually provide greater meaning to the things that we're discovering. And it's also an opportunity to work toward common research questions and larger data sets. Now, Project Owlnet has a working group, a core of 8 people who actually help kind of guide what direction everything goes. The founder is Scott Weidensaul, who you might have actually heard of before because he's actually an author of several books and award-winning books. And then and Dave Brinker, his close collaborator, those were the 2 guys that started it all. Scott's up in New Hampshire / Pennsylvania, and Dave's over in Maryland, but he goes up to Maine to band. And then we also have Jeff Holroyd up in Alberta, and of course me down in Illinois, and Nightingale over in British Columbia, Mitchell Pruitt down in Arkansas. This is Andy Brown over in Maryland, and then Marion Clements out in Colorado. So quite a diverse group of people from across the country. It's very difficult for us to meet because we're in 4 different time zones. And because I'm in the Midwest, I always do it during my dinner, but that's all right. It's a small price to pay. So this is what it looks like in terms of collaboration. Again, you'll notice that we got Clam Lake right up here. And then these are the 2 down here where I'm at. All other points in between and beyond. So what are we interested in researching? In Illinois, we're interested in what factors impact the activity patterns of saw-whet owls during their stopover in winter. So what are they doing when they get to Illinois? How active are they? Are they constantly feeding? Are they just leaving as soon as they get to Illinois? Couldn't say I blame them if they did. And some do, but some stay. What response do saw-whet owls have to conspecific vocalizations in the winter? So if I play a call, what does the owl actually do when I play that call? And we do some, I won't get too far into that, but I send Addie out to find the owl, and she finds the owl, and then she'll play something at sunset, and she'll look to see if the owl moves, and then she'll listen to hear if the owl barks at her or makes some other noise. And then we have these towers that'll actually tell if because obviously it's at dark. So she has a lot of talents, but she can't see completely in the dark. We have these towers to actually show if the owl's moving away or towards Addie in the dark, which is kind of cool. What's the mechanism that results in more female captures than male captures at lower latitudes in the winter? So that's one of the questions I'm really looking at, especially here in Bayfield County. Do males and females occupy the same breeding territories from one year to the next? We really don't know, and we're working on trying to get to that question. And then, are natural cavities a limiting resource for saw-whet owls in Bayfield County? And this is a particularly interesting one, given the amount of forestry that goes on and the types of things that the forestry companies are doing to try to mitigate, any logging that might be going on and making sure that there's enough natural cavities. All right, so this is what it looks like when we go to study saw-whet owls. The banding efforts at these Project Owlnet stations begin in September, October, and they go through November or December, depending on what latitude it is and how busy and diehard some of the banders are. Some like to just go for a couple hours, and some are there all night long for the entire month of October. We have, and I will say, just so everybody, we're on the lazier side in Illinois. We go out on Tuesdays and Thursdays, for about 5 or 6 hours after sunset. So Kurt makes us look bad. So and then mist nets, these are the mist nets. I mean, you can see it, right? That's the whole point. You really can't. So they're about 8 feet tall and about 30 feet long. And they have these pockets. So when the bird actually hits the pocket, or the net, it drops into the pocket and it gets caught. And we put a little call box out there playing that toot 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 to draw it in. And then we check the net every 45 to 60 minutes. The guy in the hoodie there is actually my supervisor, who also teaches a class for undergraduates at the University of Illinois that's called owl migration, and that's all they do. So on Tuesdays, they come out with us, so we show them all of our operations, and then they do an educational outreach night in the area, which is really neat. Actually, we're up to 3 educational outreach nights that we do. One in Champaign County, one in Vermilion County, and one in Piatt County. And it's open to anybody in the public. The kids come. We have our nets. We catch owls. We catch the owls. We show people. He's one who likes to guarantee the public an owl, but of course they're wild owls, so you just never know what's going to happen. Yeah.
I don't think you gave justice.
Yeah.
110 decibels.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's really loud.
It is. That's why we hear it all night in our heads. So then we go out. Yeah. So then we go out, and here he is going to check the net. You can hear the call in the background. There's his students following him. Is there an owl? No, I don't think so. Wait a minute, Dr. Ward. There's one. Yep. So he goes back. Don't get caught in the net, Dr. Ward. All right, he's going in, he's going to check it, and then he'll bring an owl out. So, all right, so we get the owl, then what do? We try not to torture it too much. We try to catch it, measure it, and get it back out the door. What are we measuring? We're measuring how long its wing is. We're measuring its mass. And those 2 things actually will tell you if it's a male or female most times. So like a lot of raptors, the female is larger than the male, usually. But there's a gray area in between. And so they did some research, and they found out that most of the time, if you have a really big bird, it's a female. A really small bird, it's a male. And then if it's in between, well, sometimes you just have to put unknown. They can actually take blood samples. They can send them off to a lab. It gets expensive and time consuming. So for the most part, we just leave it at male, female, or unknown. In our case, we do go one step further because we're interested in tracking these owls and knowing where they go and how long they stay in Illinois, or in the case of Bayfield County, knowing if the bird is staying within the county or if it's leaving annually. So we put on these Motus tags. They pulse every 12 seconds. When you pick it up with the receiver, it kind of makes this click, click, click kind of sound. Sometimes people compare it to popcorn. So we make a little harness, which you'll notice the bottom left picture. That's the actual tag. I was having a particularly frantic day, and apparently I ran out of paper and was writing on my hand. But the middle picture, you'll notice we have it's the transmitter on the back. And then on the far right, I don't know if you're able to see it, but so this is an owl we named Quincy. And you'll notice this thing that looks like a stick is actually cut down from its tail. So then a transmitter is only useful if you actually have something that's actually listening to it and recording it. So in central Illinois, we have 6 towers over an area of about 800 acres that are constantly listening. Each tower has 6 antennas, so that's, you do the math, it's 36 antennas. And these things are pulsing every 12 and a half seconds about. So after a winter, if a bird stayed there 80 to 100 days, which is not unheard of, I end up with millions of lines of data, where in some cases I know where that owl was every 12 seconds. Mm-hmm. Not all of them are that cooperative. In fact, many of them want to go off somewhere else. It took me a while to realize, because we're in a river valley. That's the only reason I'm not catching these things in cornfields. Although I had never tried to catch them in a cornfield, I guess it's possible. But in any case, I thought they were migrating south. Come to find out, I went 3-4 miles south of where we had been tagging the birds along the river valley, and all of a sudden I had like 5 more birds. So I'm like, well, I guess we need to put another tower up. But you keep going down that road, and before you know it, you have a forest of towers, and towers are a finite thing. They are expensive and difficult to maintain when you have a bunch. So we stick with 6 there. The tags have a unique pulse. And then what we can do in central Illinois is we can figure out roughly where the birds are sleeping during the day, especially if I've got two or more towers actually picking them up at the same time. I can actually triangulate and figure out, okay, the bird's here. Because I mean, Addie's great at tracking owls, but I can't have her out there 24/7, constantly looking for the bird. We do, however, in the case of birds that do go outside that tower array, that's when we do have to hand track the birds. We can figure out daily activity, like how much the birds are moving, if the signal strength from each antenna changes. So if it's getting louder and softer, that means the bird is moving around. So we can use as an index for activity. And then we look at stopover duration. So how long the bird is actually in Illinois before it either goes further south, like some do, or when it goes back north in the spring, which, in case you're wondering, what we figured out so far in Illinois, they'll leave in like mid-March to like the first week in April. And usually they're headed back up. And in Wisconsin and Michigan, the ones that migrate by mid-April. So, and this is what it looks like hand tracking. So that's what this is here. So we've got our antenna, we attach it to the receiver, and then we just, hope for the best, say a serenity prayer, and hope we find an owl. Go out. A lot of bushwhacking with that one. So here's what we've learned so far in central Illinois. It might not surprise you, but saw-whet owls in Illinois are not very active. Remember, it's cold. Not like here cold. Not like here cold, but it's cold. And remember also that they're trying to go through the winter undetected, because there are a number of things that can predate on them. So they are most actively foraging at dusk and dawn. And that's kind of what you'll see with these tall bars on the left and on the right. So in the middle of the day, they're a little bit, they're just sitting there, and even in the middle of the night, they're not as active. We've learned that most birds that visit central Illinois are female. Most birds that visit central Illinois are very young, usually less than 5 months old. So when we have a bird that we catch, I should have mentioned this earlier. Some of you might have noticed the wing on the owl was pink. Like, wow, I didn't know owls' wings were pink on the underside. They aren't, except for when you show UV light on them. And what happens is because birds shed their feathers and grow new ones, and when you have a new bird and it puts all that energy into the new feathers, they have this chemical called a porphyrin, which actually reflects UV rays, and it fluoresces pink. Now, how they ever figured this out, I don't know if somebody was sitting there going, I wonder what would happen if I did a UV on this, but it changes colors. And yeah. So yeah, on new birds, so birds that were just born this year in like April, May, June, they're completely new feathers. And so you shine that UV light on them and they glow pink like a flamingo. I mean, it's obvious, right? And then the next year, they'll replace some of those feathers, but a lot of them will still be old feathers. And the old feathers, because they're worn and some of that has broken down, it'll look kind of more pale. So on a bird that's more than a year old, you'll see like pink feathers and then a gap where it's pale and then more pink feathers. And so looking at those patterns of bright pink and pale, you can tell if a bird's a hatch year, the first year, if it's in its second year of life, and sometimes even its third year of life. But that's about as exact as it gets. Once you get beyond that, you say, well, it's an old bird, However, if Kurt were to band an owl up here, and let's say he banded it as a third year bird, and then eventually a couple of years later, it found its way to Illinois and I caught it, I can actually submit, I'll just look at it and go, well, it's at least 3 years old. That's all I can do. But if I send my record in to Washington, D.C., the bird banding lab, they'll say, oh, well, that's the bird that Kurt Reed caught, 2 years ago up here in Bayfield County. And that bird's actually 5 years old. And that's how we get longevity records. So that's the significance of people banding. Yeah. I think the record right now is something like 11 years and counting. Sometimes it's just a matter of we haven't caught enough old birds. Maybe they've gotten wise to us, in their older age, and they don't go in the nets. But yeah, so it's a neat little thing. This is one thing that we saw at Central Illinois. You'll notice these different triangles here are our different towers. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, and the other two are somewhere over there. And these circles here are where the birds can be found. So we got this orange one is one bird. So it's kind of along here, but then all of a sudden it popped over here. This other bird in the blue tended to hang out around here. And then this other one, the white, was kind of all over the place. Each one of these dots though corresponds to several days. So a lot of times they'll stay in the same roost for several days, and then might be something disturbs them, or maybe they see a more interesting place somewhere else, or maybe the weather conditions, maybe that's a more exposed spot. All right, we've learned that owls, like I mentioned, begin migrating through Wisconsin early October, like now. Kurt's already caught 33 this season, on his way to 100. They continue fall migration to locations further south. Some birds overwinter in Wisconsin, Central Illinois, and that's, again, kind of one of the things we're getting at is which ones do and which ones don't. This shows stopover duration. So when birds migrate to Illinois, how long are they staying? So you notice in the far left here, we've got November 1st and then all the way over here into April. Some of them don't stick around long. But then there's others. This is Frida, Queen of Kennecook here. She stayed the entire time. Wish I knew where she went. She's one that never got picked up anywhere else. This shows the difference too between years. So this is 1 year, and this is a totally different year. You notice more birds are staying at Kennecook in Central Illinois throughout the winter in that particular year. We've learned that owls are most active on dark, mild, calm nights with little or no precipitation. So oftentimes now, Kurt and I know when we go out, you know, how many owls we might have, if it's going to be a bust night or if we're going to have more. Owls do become less active as the winter progresses, at least in Central Illinois. We found that on they tend to hang out on south-facing slopes of ravines or bluffs when available, and that could be something that they're doing to kind of stay out of the elements. And then they're often roosting in the most dense stuff you could ever find. Autumn olive, honeysuckle, pine, cedars. Up here, I've noticed fir trees. Trying to think of a spruce, you know, in the lower branches where it's really thick. We've learned that owls respond to playback, but they tend to do so at dusk or when it's dark outside. I always do mention, usually at this point, you know, it's very tempting. You're like, oh, I really want to see an owl. I'm going to go play the toot-toot-toot call and just get a whole bunch of them, and I'll feel like my life is fulfilled. The one thing I would caution with that is, again, when you go to do playback, it's nice to do it for a little bit just to know if something's there, but playing it for a long period of time just to upset an animal or to try to see how close they'll get to you, that's really not an ethical thing, right? Because remember, these birds are small owls. They are susceptible to predation by other things. I mentioned barred owls are my nemesis because I have barred owls that like to hawk my nets. And if they see a saw-whet, they'll try to swoop down and eat it. So obviously I have to stay cognizant of that. And I monitor my nets pretty closely when that happens. I'll shut it down for a couple hours if I see a barred owl or hear one. So, I mean, we're doing this playback for extended periods of time for the science aspect of it, and going to the risk of that to advance our knowledge. So please be ethical if that's something you ever consider. The other thing, birds tend to respond more to the toot calls than the other calls I played. I don't speak fluent Saw-whetese, so we don't know what they're saying and what these calls, but we're starting to try to understand by doing this type of research. Owls, these owls are following interesting migration pathways. There are many birds that are migratory that I could say follow the same path and come back to the same spot. We do work with whippoorwills, and it's crazy. We caught a whippoorwill on the breeding season in Illinois, and we put a little tag on it that would actually record all of the locations using like sunlight variations and whatnot. And the thing flew all the way down to Oaxaca, Mexico, and then flew all the way back to the exact same spot in central Illinois. And the only reason I know that is because the only way we could get any data is if we recaptured the bird. And so we put the net out in the exact same spot, flipped the call box on, and boom, within 1 minute, the bird flew in. I mean, some birds are very, very, very faithful in their migration routes and their breeding sites. Not these. I wish these were. And that's the challenge, and that's why we're doing this work. So I've had birds that I caught in central Illinois that were banded in Pennsylvania. And I've had birds that, were banded, which makes a little bit more sense, in central northern Wisconsin or northern Michigan, because we're kind of just due south of Lake Michigan. So it kind of makes sense. Some people have had birds from the other side of the country, and you're sitting there thinking, how did that happen? Especially when sometimes one year a bird might go one direction and the next year it might go a different way. So there's a lot we really don't know about this. And this kind of shows, to the bigger arrow here, we've had a lot of our birds that we've captured from other places that were from Whitefish Point up here, the Upper Peninsula. This is Hawk Ridge, thank you. Something. A lot of these places start to have the same names up by Duluth. So we've gotten a few from there. Here's our Pennsylvania. We banded one that they caught, and they banded one that we caught. It's like trading birds, So really interesting. And then, so with Motus, what we've been able to see, so these were birds that we captured at Kennecook here in East Central Illinois. And then these are the paths they took back north in the spring. This was one of the best ones. So this is Penelope. Penelope disappeared out of our array, and I feared the worst for Penelope. And I had a crazy hare one day that I'd go out with this antenna outside the array on what I considered a frigid day, which all y'all up here are probably thinking 20 degrees isn't that cold. But I went out nonetheless and went hiking for a while, and all of a sudden I picked up a signal. I thought, wow, I wonder if this bird's still alive. And all of a sudden, I after a lot of trekking through the woods, here she is right in front of my face. I thought, well, this is pretty cool. And I think that was it was like March 27th. And I'm constantly looking at the Motus website to see, if our birds are being picked up anywhere else. And about a week later, I looked, and I don't know if I scared her this much, but that night after I had found her, she actually flew all the way up to Detroit and then stayed there for a week. This is like our champion poster child bird. I stayed there for a week and then headed to this area of Ontario, which is where Motus began. And they have like a field of like 200 towers here. So when I saw she was headed that way, I'm like, oh, please keep going, go into this area here. And so she flew that night, and it was just ping, 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 all the way up. So we actually had a really good idea of where she went, how fast she was flying, what direction she was going, where she was stopping. Yeah.
How do you distinguish one owl from another?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, with the receiver, they're all at the same frequency, but it's like Morse code. Like they have a different signature, the different transmitters. So like there's 4 little pulses, and sometimes it might be something like, might be one bird and another one might be. And so you're like, okay, well, that's Fred, or that's, Penelope or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
So when I read about this, I'm still learning so much about this.
Yeah.
I usually read 9 to 18 miles per night.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then they'll stop over.
So
you have these that seem like they don't have going the wrong way.
Right. Yeah.
And why?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we don't know at this point. In conversations with Kurt, I've likened it to because these birds are small and they don't have very long wings like you would expect with a lot of really long distant migrants. So I joke, that they probably just look around and then they wait for they wait for a strong, if they're going north, a strong southerly breeze and throw themselves in the wind and off they go, right? Because they don't have the energy to really, like you had mentioned, like on one night, if the wind really isn't with them, they're probably not going to fly very far, if at all, because it's just very energetically expensive to do that. And I did look at the profile of, I haven't had the time to look at this for every bird, but for this particular bird, because it was so far, I thought, how did that bird get that far? And I looked at the atmospheric profile, and that particular night, I think there were like 60-mile-an-hour winds aloft. Now, I don't know, that would have been a heck of a ride for Saw-whet at 60 miles an hour. I imagine they probably didn't hit that current, but when I looked at the actual direction of the wind that night, it actually followed that track perfectly from Champaign to Detroit, which is really neat. So, I mean, they've got to be using the wind to their advantage. And that's why last year we actually didn't have many saw-whet owls coming down to Illinois. We had this weather pattern set up where we had these really strong southerly winds, and it was extremely mild all through October. And I mean, I think a lot of times the average wind was like 20, 30 miles an hour each night. And so, if a bird's going to try to fly south, it's got that as a headwind. It's kind of a non-starter. So we didn't have as strong a migration that year. Here I have fall migration paths. This particular bird somehow dodged all the motor stations going all the way up north. I don't know if that was intentional or just luck, poor luck on our part. But that I always show that as an example that one of the limitations of the technology is if there's no towers there to actually listen for the birds, you won't know that they went there. And that's actually part of the reason why we put these stations up here in Bayfield County, because there hadn't been anything before. It was kind of a black hole. And we had put 100 tags on a bunch of different bird species this spring as migrants. And this wasn't the intention, but we actually picked up 2 of those birds. They were actually veeries that had flown straight from Champaign up to Bayfield County, then continued on, took a hard left over into Minnesota, and ended up somewhere over in Fargo and points beyond. So if we hadn't had those motor stations here, we would have had no clue. Yeah.
How long do the transmitters last?
Depends on the size of the transmitter and what you put it on. In the case of the saw-whet owls, they last 2.5 years. In the case of like the veery I was just talking about, I think that only lasts maybe a year. But a lot of that has to do with what type of question you're looking at. You can get them to go longer if they pulse slower. But the problem is if you're out hand tracking and you're waiting for your next pulse to tell you which way to go, 12 seconds is a long time. You point it, you hear it, and then you go, okay, well, that way or that way. What am I going to do? And I'm like, okay, I've got one move in 12 seconds. Which way is it going to be? So it's challenging, but it's interesting. Yeah, I get that a lot. And this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but it depends. And the things that it depends on include the terrain around the tower and how tall the tower is to be able to get above that terrain. So that's one thing you got to consider. So you don't want to put a tower down in a valley because you won't pick up things from very far. So a lot of times I try to get a higher area with lower land around it. Trees are a big thing. So the more trees you have and the more density of the leaves, the more it's going to dampen the signal. And so the bird's going to have to be a lot closer to the tower to be picked up. How high the birds fly. So these guys are down in the scrub. So there's a lot more leaves and things to get in the way. But when they migrate, and this is what we saw at Kennecook in central Illinois, they fly up higher to get into those winds. And as soon as they fly up above the trees, like ping, we got it on the tower, So the higher they migrate. I don't think these guys migrate very high above the ground because, again, they're not really aerodynamic compared to some of these other birds. Flying kittens, remember. But there are other species like wood thrushes that fly, some cases 800 feet, 1,000 feet in the air. And so you figure it's easier to pick up that signal from a tower. The furthest I think we've gotten, this is a really extreme example. We did work in the Yucatan Peninsula where everything's flat as a pancake from the asteroid years ago. you've got nothing on the Gulf of Mexico to interrupt it because it's all flat. So the only thing that's your interruption is the curve of the earth. And we could pick up birds that we had tagged in Alabama flying across 60 miles out. I wish it was all that good. Usually it's closer to like a half mile to a mile, but I'm pretty strategic usually when I go to all the effort of putting a tower out that if I'm going to pick something up, usually I'll like those towers that I put across Wisconsin, the border there, I spaced about every 15 miles apart, uh, 15 to 20. And we've actually had birds fly as they're migrating through like a wood thrush where it's been picked up by two towers, adjacent towers simultaneously. So, I mean, that's probably the average. The good average is like 15 miles. But yeah.
The idea of towers to monitor
Mhm.
birds, are there other species that are being monitored
Yes.
the same way as there the technology advancing that you can have one tower that can monitor multiple?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the beauty of the Motus system. We had done telemetry at the University of Illinois for a long time, just doing like these individual frequencies, and every bird had their own frequency, and it was hard because you had to switch back and forth to different frequencies. But Motus, what they do is they all use the same frequency. It's just those different like codes. And so I can actually pick up a bird that some researcher might have put a tag on in like we've had Swainson's thrushes in British Columbia that actually come through Illinois. And because our towers are listening on that frequency, and there's like across the Western Hemisphere, I think there's like 4,000 towers everywhere from Canada down to Panama to Chile. We had a lesser yellowlegs that was banded in Chile, and it flew up through Panama where it was detected, and then ended up in Kansas, exotic, right? And ended up all the way up in the Northwest Territories of Canada, and then came back down, was detected in Illinois on its way back down. And I think last time I checked, as of 3 weeks ago, it was in Florida. So that's the beauty of Motus in that everybody's collaborating and putting these out to benefit everybody's research because it's just so cost prohibitive otherwise. Yeah.
I mean, one tower, is it taking up many birds at the same time?
You at Kennecook in Central Illinois, just because I've got 20.
How do you tell which is which?
Yeah, yeah, it's like 20 little homing pigeons, all flying around the tower because they're all hanging out there for the winter. Most stations I have in Illinois, if I don't put tags out at that site, I'm usually only picking up random birds as they migrate through. And so it's not that high of a density. The other thing historically is that one of the limitations was like a tag costs like $300. So it is an investment, to actually put a tag out. So that was keeping too many tags from going out because not everybody could afford that many. But again, because these are pulsing every like 12 and a half seconds, the Saw-whets, they don't really overlap that much. So it's pretty easy to distinguish one from another. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Most kind of intro. I could talk hours for most. But I should focus back on northern Wisconsin here. So what we've done here, so we were here in March, we were here in June, and we're here now. Addie and I came up here. We didn't know hardly anyone. We had no idea that this area has such really wonderful people. It's been amazing doing research up here and all the context we've made. We didn't even know Kurt existed until he called us, said, come over for dinner and a beer. We said, sure, we'll do this. And next thing you know, we've got a collaboration going on. So what we ended up doing and what our original task was, we were going to try to put tags on birds that were breeding here. Because we put all the tags on migrating birds down in central Illinois, but we have no idea what's going on in the breeding grounds. And so we caught a male, Archie. I'll mention him a few more times. And then 4 females that we could tell were breeding because they had a brood patch. Archie we caught over on Beck Road, kind of between here and Barnes. We were trying to put up towers close to Archie, but we had to get permission to put up a tower. And how do we know if I was that clairvoyant, I'd buy a lottery ticket, because I didn't know where we were going to catch Archie. Come to find out, it was on Forest Service ground, and they had like a 9-month process to put a tower up. So it just wasn't lining up. But we put the towers where we did in hopes that we'd catch an owl nearby. And that's for the 3 Motus stations. And Bayfield South, I think, is about 1.5 miles from Archie, but Archie never flies high. And Archie never leaves his 80-acre area. So we've never picked up Archie, except for when we go bushwhacking with this to go find Archie. He makes it difficult for us, but that's okay. We like him. And what we've done in the future, so here's where the Bayfield South Tower is. This is kind of a lot of this is Bayfield County for us. We put nest boxes up. Kurt Reed graciously allowed us to use these. And we put them up around the tower so that we could actually bring birds into the landscape and into the range of the tower so that we could actually get more information about what they're doing, how widely they're ranging once they decide to breed. So it's a little bit of a leap of faith because, of course, they've got to be able to utilize the boxes, and we're hoping they will. And this is also, because all of this is managed forest-wise, timber, there's not really that many cavities or older trees that they can utilize. So we actually think the number of cavities could be limiting how many birds are actually using that landscape. So that's kind of the other question that we're looking at here. And then there were also 2 Saw-whet owl boxes that were installed near the Paradise Lake area. Compliments of Manulife, who's worked very closely with us on utilizing their land to put tower up to monitor movements there, and then also look at the same type of breeding questions that we have. If you ask someone I know, he would say not outside of arm's reach. But the literature shows about 10 to 15 feet, which is usually outside of most people's reach. So there is ladder involved, when we go to check them. Or we've got here's a nice little, this is Kurt Reed's here. And so he can, put it up there and the little endoscope connects to his phone, and then he can snoop on what's going on in the box, kind of thing. I'll skip this for a minute. Yeah, so so here's this is the group we're working with out of Beaver Creek and Fall Creek, yep. And over at Carpenter Nature Center, over kind of by the Twin Cities. So Jennifer Beath and Jeanette Kelly, thank you. So many names floating in my head. And then of course Addie here. And so they're working down over here, kind of by Eau Claire. We're working up here, and we're over in Twin Cities. This is what the Motus station looks like. Because I was a little nervous about the winters up here, I added another solar panel. It's a little unsure. But here we've got 4 antennas off of cardinal directions. This is the one at Bayfield South. Archie's hanging out somewhere way over here. So the basic components, you've got a solar panel, you've got a receiver down here in the box with some batteries. Yeah. So why we do all this, and some things that you can think about in terms of what you can do to kind of help with all of this. In general, owls need refuges or refugia on property for roosts. Leaving dead and hollow snags, really important to them. I mentioned that they like to hang out in really dense understory, so keeping the hedgerows, having that understory vegetation is really important. Limiting the use of rodenticides. The article on the right there, it's a big deal at the Lincoln Park Zoo. They had this family of great horned owls that moved in. They were using rodenticide to control the rat population in and around the zoo. Next thing you know, the whole family dies. Lincoln Park Zoo, it's in the public eye. Everybody notices. Everybody gets upset. It was really sad. I think they named them all, of course, So limiting that, decon, that kind of thing, and using other types of rodent control. And then lights out at night during spring, fall migration, which isn't as big a concern here. It's beautiful dark at night up here. All right, so one of the last things I wanted to hit is how you can get involved. So we've got 20 boxes. They're all over the place. It takes a little bit to get to them. And so Kurt Reed has offered to help monitor those, but having help when he goes out there is really important. what we want to do is check them in early March, mid-April, and then in August. In early March and April, we're looking to see if the birds are actually using them, because then the ulterior motive is to catch them, put a tag on them, and potentially ban the young and the adults. Same thing in mid-April. And then in August, cleaning them up. There's quite the parasite load that builds up in there, flies and all kinds of stuff. But also, too, if they've been inhabited by squirrels, there's an eviction process, if overstayed their welcome, to make sure that, that the box is available for owls to use in the future. Potential hand tracking. If we've got people who are really excited and really savvy and want to get out and hike and go through the brush, I'm actually leaving this on the receiver with Kurt Reed. It's fun, it's rewarding, but it's challenging. But when you actually do hear those first clicks, holy cow, it's the sense of fulfillment, that you've really accomplished something. Because the reality is the birds that, I guess I should have said this earlier, we pretty well know where Archie is. We caught him in March. We followed him in March. We followed him again in March, just to be sure. And then in June, we came back. We found him. And then the other day, we found him again in the big tree right next to the road. But I couldn't see up in the big tree, so we were worried, that a hawk had eaten him and left the transmitter up there. So we went back the next day, and it had moved. So either he's alive or somebody's playing a trick on me, right? So Archie's alive and well, and Archie's probably the most interesting owl to follow around, just because we know in general where he's hanging out. But the 4 females, we have not found since. And we have about driven ourselves nuts trying to find. I think we spent 3 hours yesterday trying to find the one over by Paradise Lake. There was one actually down by the Namakaga, not too far from here.
We did find that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we tagged it, and then the next day we found 100 yards down.
Yeah. But she's giving us a slip.
In the thickest stuff that you ever think, and we have a picture of this owl pretty low to the ground,
Mm-hmm.
with a very disturbed black and white warbler.
Yeah.
Right, I'm sure the warbler had a nest nearby.
Exactly.
Having the owl there.
No, exactly.
But when you say you got a bushwhack,
It is. Especially the hazelnut or witch hazel, whatever it is, it's beautiful, but it slaps you in the face a few times as you're going through. So yeah, and I'm almost thinking too, at some point I might have to go aerial with this. So if any of you have any tips on how I might be able to get in a plane with one of these, that might be the next step. But you can. The limitation with the drone is the weight, because and they do make drones with antennas, but they aren't particularly strong because the antenna on the drone's kind of small. And you get the battery life of the drone too, because it can only stay up in the air for so long. But it's all an option. And then the last thing, the Saw-whet owl surveying. If you're interested in going for a night drive, February, March, April, because when we come up here, we're randomly looking in as many places as we can find for these birds. Archie, we found on a fluke. I mean, we were driving essentially every half mile, stopping, getting out, playing the toot-toot-toot-toot, listening, hearing wolves, wondering how far we should be from the car, playing again, and then we hear the bird. We think, well, okay, it sounds like it's a half mile away, but that's through the forest. Will we find our way back to the truck? I don't know. So actually knowing in advance to make the best use of our efforts when we get up here and increase the likelihood of actually capturing a bird and tagging it, we really rely on local survey efforts. And thankfully we had Brian McCaffrey, who spent a lot of time doing survey work for us, that if we had not had his help, we would have been flying blind and we wouldn't have been able to accomplish what we did. In any case, so that's my sales pitch. That's the whole thing. Now that you think you saw it all, right? Special thanks. I've got a whole bunch of partners that we've worked with both in Central Illinois and up here in Northern Wisconsin. And if you have questions that you don't get a chance to ask, I've got my email up there. And thank you all for being a really attentive audience. And thank you for letting me take this hour of your time on this beautiful day. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So, yeah.
Michael, can you step behind the
Oh,
camera again?
yeah.
Can you repeat the
Yeah, so the question has to do with population stability and demographics. Prior to 1996, which is when they figured out that this lure could be used to actually catch saw-whet owls, um, I don't think they even knew that they existed in Illinois. So and that's just Illinois on the side. Like, so you think about for the larger scale, like map region distribution, um, they thought they were like endangered or something. We really don't know, because the only metrics that we have would be like if you were doing a whole bunch of surveys across their breeding range, but we're just right here in northern Wisconsin at the southern edge of their breeding range. Um, the really heart of their breeding range is the boreal forest through like Ontario and Quebec, these remote areas of the boreal forest that a lot of people don't live. And there's not many educational institutions doing research in that area because it's so difficult and remote. So the short answer is we really don't know. We think it's stable for now. But the other tricky thing too is we think they're going through these boom bust cycles. So when there's a whole bunch of rodents, you have like the snowy owls, you end up having a whole bunch of young that year, and then 3 years later there's like nothing, and then the next year you have another boom. So in short, we don't know, and it's tricky for a number of reasons. Yeah.
So can I add to that? So I was just,
Yeah.
I just wrote an article about oak trees and masting.
Mhm.
And I did, so when I was researching my article on oak trees and masting, there was this really cool connection where unfortunately the mice really increase a year or two after
Yep.
the acorns, and then Lyme disease too, but
Yeah.
also saw-whet owls.
Exactly.
And so I don't know how many years it takes, but
Mhm.
there should be a lot of mice eating all of our acorns and then a lot of owls eating our mice.
Yep. And sometimes there's a lag, right? So trying to figure out that dynamic. Yeah. You had another question or two, right? Mhm.
Following that one.
Mhm.
They do frog surveys.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, an estimate population, can you do the same thing?
You can if you've got people out doing like actually
Repeat the
monitoring
question.
it. Oh,
Repeat the
sorry.
question.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's
Yeah, so he's asking about so they do like I think it's called Frog Watch, right? Yeah. So you go out, do acoustic surveys, listen, and kind of quantify how many frogs are in the area. Can you do the same thing with saw-whets? And you could, and that's in general with eBird, that's what they do for all species. So if anybody ever goes out bird watching, they do an eBird list, and it'll show all the different species that they hear or see, detect. And they can start to throw that into a big algorithm and start to kind of project out. And that's probably the best metric we have at this point. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, that's the question.
Yeah.
If you identify that 80% of the birds you're catching in Illinois are female,
Mhm.
have you been able to sex birds up here to determine whether perhaps 80% of them are male?
Yeah. So the question was about the demographics down in Illinois with like 80 to 90% female. Is it the same? Have we been able to see the same thing up here? And just as an anecdote, so we've been banding with Kurt Reed this entire week, and we've been out. Well, not all of us have been on. Kurt's been out almost all night. So the rest of us are kind of weak and we go to bed. But but I think most of the birds he's caught, I think of the 33 birds we've caught this week, two.
Two were unknown,
Yeah,
none were male,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
And the rest females.
yeah. So, but then again, it's hard to tease apart with his banding station how many are migrating through versus how many are breeding here.
Can you repeat the numbers from Kurt?
Yeah, so it was 33 this week, and you had two unknown.
Two unknown.
Yep, and then no males. One. Okay, no males. Yep.
No males.
Mhm.
I've got some summary statistics for about the last 300 saw-whets that I've banded. 78% were female, 6.5% were male, 15% unknown, and it was pretty much split between hatch year and older.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and older. But I don't think that's much different that other banding stations
Right.
have seen.
Mhm.
But I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, 99% of the birds that we catch now at this time of year
Mhm.
are
Are
migrating through.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
One last question.
Yeah.
Those birds that overwinter up here,
Mhm.
You've seen the classic regrade and the snowy out from down through the snow.
Right.
Look at the snow.
No, I mean, they all year they're pretty much eating mice and voles. I mean, that's what they're good at, and that's what they stick to. So the question was, what the saw-whets eat during the winter, and yeah, and there could be periods of time where that's a little bit harder to actually find them, and that's and in that situation, that's where they'd be less active. But there's a lot we don't know because, like I said, very few people have researched them on the breeding grounds and for the whole year. So this is kind of the beginning in this area of that kind of research. There's a couple people in Maine, and then they also winter in there's some wintering populations in the Appalachian Mountains. So those are kind of the three areas where people have started to look more at this breeding thing and what's going on. So yeah, good questions. Yes.
That tower structure you showed with
Mhm.
the four antennas.
Yep.
Are those four antennas all connected, or are they four different radios?
So they're all four go into separate inputs in the receiver.
So you can directionalize.
So you can actually, right, because the
Okay.
question was more about like with the four antennas, can you actually tell which direction the signal's coming in? And you're able to do that, yeah, which is pretty cool. Yes.
Very interested in expanding the locations for the vaccine box. I'm thinking to the west side of 13, which is off of Old Forest area too.
Yeah, so the question is about expanding the nest box program. And when it comes to expanding, there's always an interest that the biggest problem is making sure they're monitored. So like, for example, they have up by Whitefish Point in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, that the whole eastern end of the peninsula is covered with like 150 nest boxes. And so they've got tons of them. The problem they run into is twofold. One, having somebody to actually monitor all of them, because that takes time. Because how long did it take you to look at all 20? Probably a day or two, right? 2 days, yeah. And then the other aspect too is if the nest boxes are put up in an area where there's a whole bunch of natural cavities, there's a good chance they won't be used. It's hard to know that. I mean, you kind of got to know your landscape and an idea of, how recently something might have been logged or how old the trees are. Because I think they've got like 200 of them in the Appalachian Mountains, and I think 2 of them were occupied. So it was a whole bunch to check and not really. So that's why we put them where we did in Bayfield County, because we knew that there weren't many natural cavities for them to use. You just have to actually get the birds to notice them. Yeah. Yeah. So a typical mouse will last them, like, depending on the time of year, like 3 to 4 days. So if you expand that out, you're talking about 100 mice a year. It's a lot, right? Yeah. Good question. Yes.
Yeah, 2 questions really. How effective are the boxes? I mean,
Mhm.
have they been? And the second question, how often do you find other things?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
squirrels,
Right. So he asked about how effective the boxes are, and how often are they occupied by other things. Out of all the 20 boxes that we had, how many had squirrels in it this time? A bunch.
And with babies, and they were so cute, and a couple of them were flying squirrels.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that you would show the picture of
Oh, I didn't put it.
the when we band, we also get flying squirrels in the nest, in the thing. And once in a while they'll actually get caught, but usually they will get on the tramo and they will just run along
Yeah.
there. And so I have to go and just shake them off.
Yeah.
But they are so cute. But this is the box.
Yeah, so these are the boxes, and what we've done on the front to reduce predation risk is actually put this collar that actually prevents, because raccoons sometimes try to reach in there, that kind of thing. And they open in the front here, and we usually put some wood chips in them. One thing I will say about the effectiveness, there was a study done in British Columbia where they had put up a bunch of boxes in a poplar plantation. So, the land had been cleared. There were no other trees. They put all these poplars up, then put up all these nest boxes, and almost every single nest box was occupied the next year because there was just a limitation. There were the owls there, but they had nowhere to actually nest. So I think a lot of it really depends on what's available there on the landscape versus how many owls and that kind of thing. Yeah.
What size is your hole? Because I feel like that also looks
3
like
inches.
a barred owl nest.
3 inches.
Yeah, so the hole's about 3 inches. Barred owls are pretty big. Yeah, it gets stuck trying. Yeah, it'd be funny. Yes,
How thick is that sleeve?
this right here. Yeah, so the sleeve, the ring that we put around the hole of the box is the same width as the wood. So it's just essentially like doubling the width of the box at that
And
point.
we really don't know if that's effective.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Why do you double it? I don't.
So oftentimes if you have a predator like a raccoon with a longer arm, it's harder for them to reach down in there. Some people put like a PVC sleeve over it. There's all kinds of things. And that's one of the fun things about Project Owlnet is, all these different people try different things across the US and Canada. And then somebody will send an email like, because we're all on the listserv and they go, what do you all know about, owl boxes? And then all of a sudden you get 50 emails, like, I tried this. Well, that didn't work. Well, this worked in New York. Well, that didn't work in, North Carolina, Yeah.
So what side does have good box, building instruction?
Yeah, the resource I used for building instructions for the Saw-whet owl nest box, there was a group in Maine that actually, if you search Saw-whet owl nest box Maine, they have guidelines, recommendations for the dimensions, the height, the placement, when you should put it out, how often you should check it. And that's a good standard that a lot of the people on Project Owlnet kept referring to. And like I said, everybody has their tweaks and their personal opinions. Yeah.
Comment on something?
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of experience with nest box programs with kestrels down in southern Wisconsin. And I don't know how I got hornswoggled into doing this, but in the last 4 years, I've banded 1,143 kestrels. Their nest box program has over 210 boxes. They've got over 100 volunteers who monitor it. And that is the biggest thing, that it's really counterproductive if you put out boxes and you don't monitor them, because they throw out starlings, house sparrows, other species they'll keep in,
Right.
because it's unethical to kick them out. But if I would recommend, this is really a kestrel box. And you can go to the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance, used to be Madison Audubon, and just go type in kestrel, and they've got all the instructions for how to do it. And I would recommend that anybody who's interested in doing the monitoring, if we're going to actually open it up, we wouldn't open it from the front. We'd actually reconfigure this so that it opens from the side. It's much easier to do, more efficient. And
Especially on the ladder.
yeah, are any of you interested in being monitors of the boxes?
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So basically in the fall, you put your little endoscope in there and look to see if it's occupied, whether the chips need to be refreshed, if there's a bunch of junk in there that needs to be cleaned out. And then in the spring, it's basically going to the site, using the endoscope again, and you're looking for occupants, right?
Right.
And then for kestrels, we know if something is occupied, we wait a certain number of days, or wait until the eggs are a certain age. And then we go in and we try to capture the adults. And we have over 80% chance of capturing the adult. And then once the eggs have hatched, we wait 12 days to go and then take the ladder and get the other. But you can see how you have to have volunteers. There's no way that one person can do this. So
Exactly.
anybody who's really willing to do this, and I guess I've been charged with
Yeah, right.
coordinating this.
Yes, he's our local contact up here. So
yeah. And I live in Fort Atkinson, so I'm only up, a certain amount of time. Yeah.
Give me that thing that you had.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thing that goes up and
Yeah.
looks in, you actually see it, or you just kind of
So I don't have my phone with me, but
Something through that?
yeah, so. You know,
Oh.
so this has got an internal battery.
You want to turn it up?
And do you want to step in front of the computer? So,
Up looking into this, but this can see it and then you can get.
So what I do is, yeah, so the first thing, we just put it into the hole. So that's why I don't like the more than 12 feet tall, because I'm pretty tall and I've got a long arm, but you know, you gotta stretch it up.
Able to see what
Yes.
is occupied, and obviously it's used by multiple other.
So-
Potentially between.
How this works, this generates a local Wi-Fi. Oh, do you have it on there?
Yeah.
Yeah, it generates a local Wi-Fi, and so you don't have to have cell service or anything.
Oh, you don't have to have a cell service.
Right. No. And I think this is really convenient one. Of course, they don't make them anymore, but there are others that are commercially available that don't cost that much. And that is available on the Kestrel site for the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance. Yeah. You have one of these? Yeah, and they work great, don't they? Yeah.
Well, I don't have that one, but I have.
Something,
Yeah.
yeah.
Great questions.
yeah, well, and
Looking at this.
follow up on the moment.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
So, I know a lot of you are here because you also signed up to volunteer already, but now if some of you have had your interest piqued, I do have a sign up form here. And so I'll have it on the table in the back of the room. And if you've already signed up with me, your information is on the back, and you're welcome to check and make sure that I got your email and phone number correct, and that we have the thing that you're interested in marked. And then the other side is for new volunteers. And then Kurt will be coordinating, right? So days to go out and checked the next nest boxes. So March and April and August. And he needs extra hands to carry the ladder, to help do the cleaning, to be up on the ladder. And also if he's up on the ladder, to call 911 if he falls off the ladder. So it's kind of a safety thing as well as sharing the load. And then we also have the 3 Motus towers that kind of need 1 or 2 people to adopt them.
Actually, we're covered on that.
Oh, you
That's
are?
a couple days. But the other thing that I had mentioned in there was the aspect of sorry, keep forgetting about this. But if you are interested in doing the surveys in the spring, that's going to be really helpful. And you can just email me for that. We can coordinate. It'll probably be Addie helping coordinate, because she actually did that at length, not just for up here this past spring, but also down by Fall Creek, and then also over by the Twin Cities, so that we kind of know where these birds are setting up breeding territories, and then we can actually, when we come up in March again or April, wherever that, being able to opportunistically capture birds at those sites. So, yep.
Okay, so what I'll do for that is, if you sign up on the volunteer list, I'll give you that big
Yep.
email list, and you
Perfect.
guys can let everybody know when you're up, and then people can respond to a specific sort of call at a specific time to go out and do things. Yeah.
Why do you think there's going to be owls in the Barnes area, since there's no place for them to have been there for several years?
It's a good point. So why would birds be in the Barnes area versus, other areas? And again, at this point, there might not be, and there probably, but actually, no, I can't say that because in March, when we were actually doing surveys out there, we could hear birds calling. We just weren't sure where their territories were. So it's a matter of, in that case, giving a more ideal houses. And the other aspect of that is the landscape's constantly changing there with the timber management. So they might be in one spot, and then they have a timber contract, and then that all is cleared, or a lot of it.
They like a woody area.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yep. Oh, yeah. Duh. Why did I not think about? So there's so many moving parts to this. The other aspect that I ran into somebody of all places from Costa Rica, which you're like, well, what does that have to do with saw-whet owls in Wisconsin? Ironically, a lot. So there's another species of saw-whet owl in Costa Rica called the unspotted owl. It's the only other species of saw-whet owl in the world. So you can, have that feather in your hat that you've got one of the only two species of saw-whet owls here in Bayfield County. And what he had done was he played the unspotted saw-whet owl's call by a box, and it actually brought a bird in, checked out the box, and 2 days later was nesting in the box. So that's also something we're going to try in March. But, we're looking for baseline data with the volunteers just to look, so, okay, is there anything there? And if we know there's not anything there, it isn't going to hurt us to play a call there and see if they come in. So, and they've got good hearing. I mean, they can hear, miles, 2 miles, 3 miles away. Yeah.
How do you select your tower sites?
Yeah, we select tower sites based on where we might be tagging birds, which is always the hardest part. Sometimes it's a very known thing and sometimes it isn't. How prominent the location is topographically to the surrounding area, and then the vegetation. So if I've got like a 40-foot tower and I've got 50-foot trees in that area, I don't tend to put a tower there because it's going to just attenuate the noise or the signal too much. So there's a lot. Oh, and the last thing is, which I don't have to worry about too much in this area, is electromagnetic noise. So if there's some very strong radio source of noise, it'll actually, it's like going into a crowded gym with a whole bunch of people and trying to listen to one person. There's just too much other busyness going on to actually be able to detect. So that in general is kind of the things that we look at, but it can be complicated because the other aspect too is looking for willing landowners and companies and the state, feds, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's what, 166 megahertz? Is that the
correct?
Motus, and that should penetrate pretty good.
Yeah, so the frequency is 166.380 megahertz. Yep, and that's what the FCC is kind of allowed for wildlife research at that frequency. Mm-hmm. Yep. Great. Yes.
What's the typical cost on
the Motus station? Again, that depends on a bunch of things. One thing that I've noticed it depends on is because some people can put in up to $10,000 on one, depending on what they're actually using for the actual receiver. It varies on what types of antennas people use, how tall the tower goes, which depends on the area. Because we're cheap and we're on a shoestring budget, we've whittled it down to where we actually make the receivers ourselves rather than buying it commercially, which saves money. I've actually built all of our antennas from scratch, which saves time and money. And we've gotten it down to about 3,500, I think, for a Motus station. And then, of course, you've got all the changes in materials, right? Because just in the past 2-3 years, the cost of materials has varied wildly. Yeah.
Are they portable or are they permanent?
That also depends on who you ask. Because of all the different types of research that we do, we end up oftentimes moving towers, which might sound more cumbersome than it actually is. But we build them in such a way, oftentimes, like the one you saw was a Roan 25G, which is what a lot of people would use in the olden days for their TV antennas if they weren't close to a TV station. We get a base that actually has a hinge on it. So you can actually tilt it up and tilt it back down and then remove it and go. So that's actually saved us in a lot of situations because sometimes we think an area is going to be really good. We put the tower up and then we find out there's a lot of noise there and we're not detecting it. So our first Motus station up here was actually on Mount Telmark. And a beautiful view, right? And you see for miles. And I thought, oh, this is going to be really good. And I looked at the data 3 months later and I realized it picked up nothing because there's something giving off a really loud radio noise right next to the tower. So, there could have been all kinds of birds that flew by and we just didn't pick them up. So there's a lot that goes into tower placement. Yeah.
With the onslaught of fiber, there's a lot of those Roan towers coming up on Marketplace.
Yes, there are. And we have a pile of segments in Champaign where people are like, I don't need this tower anymore. You want it? We're like, yes, yeah. We will take it. Sometimes they're in really good shape. And then other times, it's like, I don't. Yeah. Yeah, yes. So there are some bird species. So the question was about why the disparity between males and females. And for some migratory species, for example, like meadowlarks, um, female meadowlarks will migrate further south for the winter, and the males won't migrate as far because if they don't migrate as far, they don't have to fly back as far, which means they can get back on the breeding grounds again, which means they can pick all the good breeding habitats because it's one of the big things. It hasn't been proven, or there's not strong evidence for that yet with saw-whet owls, but again, a lot of that's just because a lot of research hasn't been done. So it's very likely that a mechanism like that would be going on because, I mean, it's got to be difficult for a bird like that to survive a winter up here. I mean, I haven't personally done it, but I suspect that it would be difficult given the temperature and whatnot.
You would die.
Yeah, Kurt keeps telling me that, and I agree. I take his word for it. You know.
Well, actually, I have one more theory.
Yeah.
When you think when they're on their breeding site, it's the male that does most of the hunting, right? For itself, as well as the female, as well as the babies. And it's like anything in life, you get better at it the more practice you have. And they're smaller, they have less energy requirements. And so I can see a bigger female wanting to go further south because there'd be less snow cover, they'd have more access to food.
Right.
And the males, like for kestrels, they tend to stay near the breeding site. They go to the nest box first, then the females show up. So there's probably 10,000 different reasons.
Oh yeah,
but that might be
I think
that might figure into
right. Yep.
The toot-toot call,
Mhm.
isn't that a female breeding call?
So the toot-toot so far, the ones that we use are actually male calls,
Yeah.
but
But
some
they're calling females in.
correct. Exactly.
So why would a male follow a male call?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, in the case of males coming to a male call, it'd be for competition.
Right.
So it's okay, there's somebody on my territory, and that's probably how we got Archie coming in.
Right.
You know, is it, wait a minute, who's this guy coming in infringing on my turf? You know, Yep. No, all great questions.
Yeah, really, really wonderful questions, everybody. And I think,
It's been an hour and a half.
Yeah.
You guys
Yeah,
are
it's-
so excited about flying kittens.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. But I think we will wrap it up for now, and then you're welcome to come and talk to these guys more, especially about the details of the volunteer opportunities and things like that. And be sure to either sign up or check your information on the sheet in the back too. And I will be posting this to our YouTube site soon. And then I'll send all of you that link too, so you can rewatch and catch anything you missed, or send it to friends who you think might enjoy it as well. But I want to just say thank you for all of you coming out in this kind of late notice program, and especially thank you to all the wonderful people who volunteered to help. It really was an incredible outpouring of support really quickly, and I just love our community for that. So thanks, everybody. Oh
I
yeah.
just have one quick question. We had this in the master map thing, and we went to the bird banding thing, and there was some discussion about the federal government.
I don't know anything more about the federal government and what's happening with the bird banding station. It hasn't been defunded yet.
Bird banding laboratory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have a theory on that too.
Yeah.
And then it's a cooperation between Canada and the US. And if it tanks because of no funding, I'm pretty sure Canada would take it over administratively. So we would at least have a place to submit the
That's
the data.
all this work gets done.
Yeah.
That's
Because
really
it
comforting.
disappears.
because there's over 1 million bands a year going out there, and how could you possibly justify not saving that information?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks.